Kathy, are you ready? Diane, are you ready? I'm sorry? Jim, are you ready? Okay. Okay, I think we're ready to start. Sorry it's a little late. And I haven't heard from Alan, so he'll be here in a few minutes, I'm sure. And I'm going to apologize up front. My son is playing a soccer game, so I am waiting for a score update. So I'm going to check every once in a while. Welcome to the board meeting. This is a work session, so a little more casual, hopefully, and for you in the audience, know that it's a little more casual. I should have welcomed the administration too, sorry, people in the audience. Just to review some of the comments from the public hearing in regards to the boundary changes. So I don't know if do you have anything to present to us, or just if we have questions, you're, okay. Okay, perfect, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
By now, you've all received several, we had that session, and I thought
Several?
many
Okay, yeah.
adequate, satisfactory feedback, and of course, there's, various opinions, and we weren't sure whether you needed to have Joanne once again review that process. It's important that we honor that process, that we listen, that we try to solve problems, but and we do try to study, use data with regard to the future and where we see our building trends, where we see transportation happening, that kind of a thing. So I have Joanne here and Wynn to be able to answer questions about, because there seem to be several questions about transportation, et cetera. And so I think we have forwarded everything to you that we've received, but you've also received just directly to board members quite a few emails. So what information do you need us to cover and review? This is really an opportunity for you to look at the feedback and discuss. I'm sure you've had additional calls from different patrons and citizens in your area that you represent. So.
Yes, I have. Scott, you have a question?
I don't know if it's a question as much as maybe just the format of what we're doing here might be. I'm just thinking out loud. I'm just some observations, and I think we all did. I know we were all keeping notes, and just kind of some observations and maybe some questions that I've had Joanne since the last time since the public hearing. And so let me just ask one question. I think that there was a perception, and I was trying to pull it up as I was speaking, but I need some clarity on a couple things. So, and you're unprepared. I didn't write you an email on it, so if you can't, it's okay. I understand. I don't mean to catch you blindsided.
I've got a stack. Who knows?
You got stacks of stuff. There was an alternative plan that was thrown out there from the public. It wasn't something that had been considered and hadn't been floated out on the web page. I mean, it was random, but it was obviously carried a lot of support from the DLI parents. The idea, in a nutshell, you guys correct me. I'm paraphrasing, but my sense was that it was effectively leave DLI at middle, close boundaries, and then move some students out of middle. And this is the part, if I understood right, the behavioral classroom that was part of it.
That was one
So one of the
suggestion.
questions I have immediately is, my sense was that we have a behavioral classroom in every one of our elementary schools, except right now because of the building of Sterling and the construction that's going on, as well as Copper because of what's going on. But our goal is, in fact, to have a behavioral unit at every classroom. At every school. Is that correct? Is my impression correct?
Not necessarily a behavior education classroom, but we spread them out. So we have life skills classrooms.
So everybody has something.
We have behavior education classrooms. We have an autism classroom. We have special ed classrooms. Because of the number of IEPs that principals have to do when they have those, we try and spread them out.
So everybody
that-
gets one.
We do. Right now we have 3 at West Elementary just because of the Sterling. We have packed everybody in there. And last year Copper Canyon was full because we had bussed all.
It's
Because
really
of the
not a
sta-
matter,
Yeah.
it's really not just a matter of size and space. It's about the number of IEPs that those administrators and those teachers have
Workload.
to support.
It's
So
workload.
it's workload. So what-
Workload.
And then we do try to keep special ed students not bused to these special programs, but we can't provide the same program at every.
Sure.
So there is some busing that happens with special needs kids. And then I would also say, there's not a time limit. There's not a 2-year,
No.
3-year, 4-year rotation or something
Okay.
like that.
That helps me understand. But our goal is really everybody gets a special program of some sort.
We spread it
equity
out
and-
because of the work involved
Okay.
on a principal's plate and on a school's plate.
You have to turn on your mic if you want to.
You can just leave it on, I guess.
Yeah.
So pretty much once it's all spread out, like once Sterling is up and running, is there, like every school will have at least one, or is there not that many?
Does somebody get a pass?
Yeah.
Right now, I mean, we've got a life skills and a preschool at Rose Springs, but Old Mill will open up. They'll have preschool rooms, so we'll look at moving the special ed preschool over there. Grantsville Elementary has, I don't know if they have a life skills, but they do have this special ed preschool. I mean, so
But you can't
Yes,
equivocally,
everybody.
you can't say for the long term that every school is going to have this or this unit, because with special ed students, it totally depends upon the disabilities that come
Sure.
in an area.
Right.
No,
So,
I-
you know
and
what I'm
that's fine.
saying?
And I guess I'm just trying to understand. I feel
We
like a
do
little bit of it's
spread the work
equity.
out.
It seems like to me what I'm sensing is that every school, and implied with that is every administrator, every principal is going to have some work. Everybody has a special program.
they basically will, yes.
Okay. So
They all have mild moderate. Some of them have severe life skills, which is more intensive as far as feeding
Medical.
and diapering and medical kind of issues. And then some have behavioral. Some are specific to autism or Asperger's, more developmental disorders. So, and it really depends on where. And those students are just, I mean, even
They're
more
part of your
so.
school.
They're very,
It's
we talk about kids
moving
and how
them,
anxious
yeah.
they get when they move schools. And Asperger's and autistic and special needs students are just as, if not more. So, but anyway, we try to balance those with where they're at with, we try to, there's a cluster kind of in Stansbury schools and a kind of in Tooele and then in Grantsville where we try to keep the same kind of programs in each of those areas, but we don't duplicate it at every school.
And we
They're
don't,
not on a rotation basis.
we don't move them every couple of years either. I'm not
and
sure
that was
where
a myth
that came from.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I can tell you as a
Carol-
principal at Northlake, I
Carol's
had the life skills classroom the entire time I was there, and it's still there.
Carol.
Sorry, and it's not, you already told us how that comes about, but there was definitely a feeling, and I'm not sure, and I talked to Jerry about that and said, where did this come from? Because I'm not aware of every 2-year rotation, or,
No.
I don't know where
No.
where that came from. So thank you for clarifying that, because I think we were all maybe scratching our head a little bit going, I don't think that's how it works.
It doesn't.
And so I think there was that feeling out
And middle
there.
is not on the list to become a Title I school.
No,
That
we
was
don't know where
the
that
other-
came
Who,
from
who,
either.
who, sorry,
Mill
say,
Canyon
There is
is
not, I mean, we
Oh.
have all of our Title I schools, and that's based on free and reduced lunch
Right.
counts, and so,
So another
just
question.
for clarity.
Just regarding that,
Go ahead.
that was that there was part of that plan. If I understood right, correct me, board members, if I misunderstood. But the idea was to move some of the term they used was move some Harris kids back to where they came from.
There's no room.
You answered. You read my mind. My question was
We had to move them because
Ster-
there's no room.
Sterling, if I understood correctly, as it sits today on that campus, which will sit until January probably. Steve's not
Yes.
here, but realistically, it's probably
October, November, we're trying, but it could be.
my money says that we'll move over
January.
Christmas break.
Yeah.
Okay.
But sometime in that time frame, when they start school in September, they are absolutely at capacity. Is that correct?
We've got every portable in the district out on that playground to have enough classrooms. We moved the least number of kids that we knew would no longer be in walking distance to the new location. So we moved just a couple of streets that are in walking distance to Middle Canyon.
Okay, so that, and my question was, if, again, if I understood that proposal correctly, was to move some of those Harris kids, is the term I think they had used, back to Harris, but there really is no seats there. Now, there may be there may be room when Sterling is open, but it's not until later
Whenever.
next year.
Yeah.
In the middle of the year. Yeah.
Well, Scott says November. He's optimistic.
That's what Steve told me.
So those were
would be
two bits of
awesome.
clarification I needed based on that plan, and I wanted to kind of mull over the facts of that plan and understand some things there. So I'll probably have some more questions, but that helps me understand at least what some clarifying factual answers to what was.
Well,
being
there was
proposed.
also part of that proposal that suggested that we move some kids that are currently there on out of boundaries out, but not others. And our policy doesn't allow for that. What the policy says is, if you're going to revoke out of boundary applications, it has to be done by March 15th, and that's kind of a state law. And it has to be done by the last person in.
So whether they were DLI siblings or not,
so
they're out.
picking and choosing, that's not possible.
Well, and the last time we closed boundaries, when we said
We sent
we'd close 'em,
everybody at
everybody's
Copper
out,
Canyon
yeah.
a letter when we had to move the kids from Stansbury.
The other observation, this is not as much a question, but to the board, because this is a work, it's an opportunity. My observation there was, it seems a little difficult because that proposal, a lot of those out of boundary students revolve around daycare or childcare.
They do.
And so
There are
they're
multiple
being
reasons.
their childcare is being provided by someone who lives in that school boundary. Their home school may be over at West or at North Lake. And so closing those boundaries, if we closed them wholly, would include kicking those kids out that are daycared in the physical geographic boundary. And that's another challenge I'm struggling with. But am I correct in that assumption?
I mean, according to the state law on that policy, we can't do that after tomorrow. I mean, and if we did it, it would have to be everybody, and it would have to be based on capacity. I mean, there are some specific
Right.
rules with that law, so.
Okay.
Carol.
So another observation. So obviously everybody knows that a hybrid was presented. The first hybrid B, if we could call that hybrid B, and that was presented a week, or was it a week before?
Is this the moving East Erta?
Yes,
Okay.
this involved moving East Erta, and I can say from being on the boundary committee that was never part of the discussion. And I look back now and think, well, the reason that wasn't on the discussion was because everybody was talking about moving kids out of Copper Canyon, the kids that were from Stansbury, moving them back to Stansbury, and so I don't think it was anybody's mind to say, oh, let's just move more. You know, Copper Canyon pretty much really was, other than moving the kids out, it was, really not part of that discussion. And then, the hybrid of trying to make room at Middle and moving the
Just keep going.
moving the entire DLI program, because I think we heard loud and clear, and from the public, that they were very opposed to. I know they're very opposed to moving the DLI program in general, but especially splitting the program. And I think that was a really strong sense that we don't want to move the whole. I mean, we don't want to split the program. So where I'm going with this, where I'm going with this is, I'll be honest. I live in East Erta, and my kids went to Copper Canyon, and my neighbors all go to Copper Canyon. So the first time that was presented, I went, wow, this is Friday night, and the meeting is Tuesday, or so we probably ought to get the word out to, so I tried to contact the PTA president in Copper just to say, hey, a heads up, it may be bad, this may be an option. And the reason why I say that is because it would have been presented to the public before the public hearing, so they would have had a chance to come to the public hearing and know about it. Does that
Makes
If
sense.
they were
Does that-
affected,
Yes.
yeah.
if they were going to be affected, at least they could come to the public hearing and address the board and have their say. So I think that there's a feeling about there of, well, hybrids put out there, so the board should entertain any hybrid that came out. And I appreciate, Mrs. Manzione reminded me, ultimately it is the board's final say. I mean, we have had times in the past where a proposal has been put forward on the committee, which I really appreciate the committee. The committee put a lot of work into this, and it was a lot of people that genuinely looked at every option out there. Well, I say we do, but clearly we didn't look at the Copper Canyon option because we didn't think that should be even
We
thrown
weren't looking
into
at
the-
moving more kids out of Copper
Exactly.
Canyon. We
So
were
I don't
looking
want
at
to,
moving
I'm
kids
not.
in.
My point being, and I know is that I totally appreciate the work of the committee, and I believe in the work of the committee. It's important to listen to the committee and let them have a look and then make recommendations to us. When Rebecca Busico's hybrid came out, I think it was the day before, if I the meeting. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's when I got an email.
Right. And of course the same, and I'll be honest, I read it and I saw a part in it that talked about Overlake busing students and I thought to myself, I don't think that's right. There's not a neighborhood in Overlake that we could bus. So I asked Marisa, I'm confused. Where is this coming from? And she said, well, I think it's actually referring to West Erda. And then, of course,
Middle.
Oh, excuse
Middle
me,
Erda.
Middle Erda.
Right.
Middle Erda. And then it kind of set up a red flag of, whoa, wait a minute, here we are the day before the public hearing, or the day of the public hearing, actually, and West Erda, Middle Erda, had never been put into the mix of either, the committee had made the recommendation since Middle Erda had just been moved a year and a half previous out of Stansbury. These people are always moved. They're the people that always get moved. Well, often, I don't want to say always, but often get moved because they're on a bus already, so let's just move them. And so, of course that's concerning because they didn't even have a chance to come to the public hearing. They never even knew they were in the mix. And I don't think that was what necessarily Rebecca's plan intended to, not knowing that was the group. But of course, then they get upset and up in arms because it didn't make sense to them. How come we didn't have a chance to come and have our voices heard at the public hearing? And so when we talk about these hybrids, I guess to me it's important for people to understand that there was a lot of support for that hybrid option, and I'm not really sure that people really understood that it wasn't as simple. Even though I really appreciated the work that went into it, it wasn't that there was a feeling out there that was the only option when there was a lot of information in that may not have been something that we could have really done. So, sorry, go ahead, Scott, or whoever.
I made a couple
Sorry.
notes, but one is, I think it's important to note, though, Carol, that whether they knew about it or not, as it was published and appropriate legal notice was given, that the boundaries were being affected by it, and we listed the schools. And so, if you will, those schools were in play. Whether or not there was a specific, I grant you that it wasn't, but we have in the past, I think back to last year, or 2 years ago, when we did the Stansbury thing, it wasn't a case that it was a very much, the hybrid was developed by the board the night of, and it didn't necessarily follow any particular plan, and that's okay. But I just point out that that's actually legally, the notice is good, but we did follow the law in the process. But I had a question for all of you, and what was your sense? Was it better? You mentioned something earlier in your comments. It was like, were we hearing? Did you hear that it was better to keep the program together, or was it better to move, if you will, first grade, or, starting first grade. I kind of heard mixed messages, and what I really heard was everybody's first choice was keep DLI middle. I think we all agree on
I
that.
think that's the first
But-
option.
And I think we all, no matter what, politics is a reality of compromise, right? I didn't hear a lot of, but if not that, this. And I heard a few comments, but I was curious to just hear from the board in this setting. What was your sense? What was the second choice short of keep us all here?
Karen?
I heard don't split families by dividing the program.
Is that kind?
I agree.
That's kind of what I said.
Julia?
heard that, but I still, there was a lot that, I think I heard that the most.
What I really heard was don't move at all.
Yeah, that was the most, but I mean, there was a lot I thought still that if we could keep those kids at middle, even if it meant starting another one, that those kids are invested in that school and that culture is there. I heard
kinda
that
both.
a lot too, so I'm not, I don't know where I weigh in on.
And that's why I ask you all the question, because I'd like to kind of get their.
Kathy?
Kathy, what did you hear?
Well, what I heard they didn't want the DLI, but they didn't want to split families either. They didn't want part of their kids going to Copper Canyon and part of them going to Middle Canyon. They wanted them all to go to the same school in a family, is what I understood. And of course, the basic fact, none of them want to move anywhere. They want to stay right where they are, which I don't know if it's possible unless they want 700-800 kids, usually in their and big classrooms is 35 or 40 in the end. That's a choice you might have to make.
Well, it's the lunchroom and stuff like that. Lunchroom and computer lab time that becomes a problem too.
Okay.
More students.
I'm going to be
Yeah,
honest.
that's
It's no secret, and I've talked to all of you, and I know we all want to keep the program at Middle Canyon, but I really feel strongly that we need to try to figure out a way to keep the program at Middle Canyon. Although I have to say that this keeps me up at night because I'm racking my brain trying to figure out how that's possible. I'm just gonna, the other thing that I felt like I heard, and there were a lot of really great points, and I'm not afraid to make a hard decision. I think all of us have been on the board long enough or have been in boundary decisions where it's hard. Every time it's hard. We know we're gonna upset people. We know we're gonna have families upset or kids upset, and it's hard. So that's not my problem. I think where I heard that night that maybe just resounded with me a lot is all the unknowns, and all of the Amy Mason, your husband, talked about. Sorry, help me out. Constants and the variables, right? And I'm just going to throw it out there. I worry because of the fact that there are unknowns, especially this year with charter schools opening, and we don't know where they're coming from. We don't know where they're going to pull from. It worries me because I don't really want to, and I don't think any of us really want to be back in the position we are again necessarily in a year or 2 years, going, ooh, maybe we jump.
Will be, not about the same
yeah.
schools.
But
Well,
we absolutely
but we
will
will
be if we
be.
don't do something.
We
And
should be.
another thing is with any of these DLI programs, I mean, you're looking at half of the school being DLI. So obviously, they're going to pull from other schools. It's not just, but it's not going to be evenly. I mean, it's not going to be like, oh, we're going to lose 300 here and and be able to balance it. So I think as long as we have DLIs, we've got to at least have some kind of commitment to how we're going to keep. How are we going to have that many schools filled with?
And the precedents.
Carol, but let me offer
precedents.
your question, the unknowns. But here's what we do know: there, historically, a charter school is going to draw from neighborhoods closer to it. Okay, and I mean that's just kind of a given that the closer you live to that charter school, we're not getting any charter school kids from Wendover. To an extreme, right? And so my point being, that if anything, that new charter schools, the likelihood is stronger they're going to draw from Stansbury than they are going to draw from Tooele. And so the reason I point that out is, if anything, that leaves the Stansbury schools lighter and the Stansbury feeder schools lighter, and moving the DLI program actually increases, if you will, that feeder school population total. While we may not know exactly what school, it's not like we're proposing and never would propose moving DLI to Old Mill. I mean, Spanish DLI to Old Mill. We wouldn't propose that. And so to say, oh, well, we don't know what it's going to look like in Stansbury. No, we don't. But we wouldn't even consider moving Spanish DLI to Old Mill.
I did have a parent ask me if we could move it to Stansbury.
Yeah, me too.
Well,
Ha-
they-
Well, you know,
oh,
if
we
the-
really
if-
want to make people upset.
If the model works and parents support it, and
should have
we're
it at every
able to address funding, then we should, in my mind, have it at every school. If it's a model that is shown to really work and give kids, you know, bilingual ability as well as high achievement scores, we're just going to have to figure out how to sustain in junior high and high school. It's going to look different. It's not going to be dual language. It's going to be more of a, I don't want to say honors, advanced, you know, and by the time they hit high school, these students are going to be so proficient that most of our high school teachers might not even be able to speak language with these students. So they're likely to take college classes. I mean, we're working on with the U of U and BYU, and those are two great universities. Those high school kids are going to be becoming trilingual, and they're going to be taking college courses in different content areas. So it won't even look the same at the high school and the junior high.
Does Karen, do you have a comment?
Yes.
Yeah.
I talked to Brenda Spearman a couple of weeks ago, and she told me at that time she had 550 applicants for Bonneville, and that they were 70% were from Stansbury, fairly uniform, more from Stansbury Elementary than from the Old Mill area, and the least from Rose Springs.
And that's geographic. I mean,
Yeah.
if you almost think about
Right.
it, it follows
But
geography.
studies have shown that that's the case
Yeah.
90% of the time. So
She also told me it will not be a walking school until Ivory finishes the roads over there. There's no way for the kids to walk.
Sidewalk.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
the roads and the sidewalks.
right, makes sense.
Here's another thought, or question. This is a Joanne question, so you don't have to stand. But
You have to use the microphone though.
The-
So
but here's the question. It's regarding changing teachers. We talk about, this is something I thought about today, is that we're talking about students, and clearly students are our primary focus, always, always, always. But there is a personnel conversation involved here. I mean, you're going to be moving some teachers. I'm pretty sure you're going to have some teachers at Old Mill, and that you're going to have to transfer some teachers, right? I mean, that's a
We are.
given.
They'll follow the students. So if we
And-
lose 100 kids from a school, that's 3 teachers that need to go somewhere else.
And so the thought I've had today was around teachers and movement. Because, you know, the idea of, do we kick this down the road a year? But it would seem like to me doing that is going to be more difficult to do your teacher balancing in a year than, right now you've got a lot of teachers in play, right? You can get the right grade levels and the right students and the populations to where you need to. But if we were to only try to move a DLI program next year, it really limits the number of teachers. Or do you just simply pick up those, at that point it would be 8 teachers and Middle Canyon, and you just suck all 8 over to Copper and it's done? Or would it be easier to kind of do that balancing this year when you're already got a lot of other students in play teachers in play? I was just thinking about that because the reality is there's a lot of logistics. It's not just a conversation about boundaries. It's also about who's teaching first grade at this school and who's teaching second grade at that school.
How many teachers are at each school?
And it's not just about the language teacher. There's an English side to dual language that is just as important as the target language. So, and those partnerships have formed, and those teachers are working very well with each other, and so
Some are.
for the most part, yeah.
So is it?
It's
Any
going to be
sense?
messy no matter what. It really will. It's when we can't just take the last hired. You know, Old Mill's going to need kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. So even looking at volunteers, which we try to do first, if everybody volunteers from 4th grade, we can't, staff Old Mill with.
4th grade teachers.
Yes. So,
I only
It's
brought it up because
messy.
I was thinking about the idea of, do we put it off a year? And it just seems like to me that my mind said, while you've got all these open spaces as you kind of fill out your Tetris, moving things around, it might be easier to do it while everybody's in play versus next year when it becomes a smaller population of teachers to try to find. But I don't know that.
I don't know if one's going to be easier than the other.
How many does that leave? I'm trying to look back last month to see, and I can't, maybe you know off the top of your head, how many does that leave in Copper Canyon? Like, how low does that leave Copper Canyon?
They would be losing, I think we figured out, just,
80. isn't it?
well,
Oh.
no,
Oh, excuse me.
about 200
Oh,
kids.
plus
if you
the-
take 200
sorry, I was
kids
thinking-
off of
right.
their current enrollment. And it was a little bit more than that.
Yeah, it was more than that.
That's what we moved to take the pressure off of
Mhm.
Rose Springs and Stansbury when they were really high before we.
659, and so if you take 200 plus, that's lower than 483.
So it was about 200 just depending on, so 483 is, yeah.
So, I guess,
28.
and Scott,
28?
not in any disrespect, but I'm just telling you, I am not, I just am not convinced that that's the right thing. I'm not convinced that, even though every number shows, and kind of looking at who we can possibly, it just through a conversation with Jerry yesterday, trying to figure out classroom space, or asking about first graders coming into the program. Scott, to you did well. We could, perhaps Jerry could close boundaries for all out of boundary DLI students coming in next year, because then they're all within boundary.
As long as we define its physical geographic boundaries and it's not siblings.
Right.
That works.
That was a suggestion, but now you talk about. Then it brings up that whole
Families just
that splits
the program.
That splits the
families.
program.
That splits the program, and so I'm just.
That's why I asked the question of the board. If the sense was, is it more important to keep the families together, or is it more important to keep the program at middle? And if you want to keep the program at middle, it can be done, and it says that geographic boundaries are 100% honored for first graders next year in Spanish DLI. They have to live in those addresses, and you could keep the whole program there, but it splits families. And so then the question is I kind of prioritize, okay, which is their first priority is keep it all there, great. But if that's not a reality, then what's choice B from the community? And my sense is choice B is move the whole program, don't split those families. But I don't know that for sure, and I don't think it's consensus.
No, I don't.
Okay, but we also heard a lot about, you move close to 300 kids out of Middle Canyon, if that's right.
No.
Not even close.
With the
170.
DLI.
170.
But if you're moving them and their siblings.
We're moving 170, and then what goes?
We don't know
Okay,
about
so-
the siblings.
okay.
It's 170 in the program.
So let's just even say 200. Then the concern came back of, are we going to be? We've gotten emails about it, and the exact same thing of, aren't we just, moving it from one place to the other just to have the same problem at Copper Canyon in a few years? So could you address that? Because in my mind, when Hybrid B came out, as much as I don't want to move the program, at least if we move East Erta kids out of Copper, that's going to make more room. And but could you maybe address that? Because that is and back to their argument of, will you take all those kids out? But it's landlocked. So where are those kids? How are we going to fill that school?
I could answer both those questions.
Well, on the committee, remember when we looked at moving the entire program, then we knew we had to make room for that. So we looked at a couple of ways of moving additional kids out of Copper Canyon in the beginning. And that's how that hybrid came of moving
Carol,
the East Erta kids.
what happens if they get too crowded is there's what was it, 90-ish kids that live behind Walmart.
70,
72,
but 50,
77.
yeah, but 50 some
If
odd
those
attend
those
Copper.
students could go to Overlake. At the point, at that point, Middle Erda moves.
We looked at moving
But that's
them
not,
to.
we're not doing that
yeah.
I'm not suggesting now, but what I'm saying is, you keep saying, well, what happens when? The next logical moves, if in fact Copper's big, you've got some other pieces that can move. Middle Erda could go to Rose Springs. Those Walmart kids could go to Overlake. You ask where the students would come from for Middle Canyon. I really believe, in fact, just doing really fast math at Sterling, they're at 750 today. They have 5 more years of DLI. If they bring in 30 kids per grade,
They don't have 5 more years.
well, they
Oh,
have,
because they've already
they've got
started.
first grade.
Yeah.
They only have a first grade, right?
No, they've
No,
got
they've already,
3.
they've been,
Yeah.
Sterling
they're
has 3?
Yeah.
yeah,
grades.
their,
Okay,
their Portuguese program is.
good.
Yeah.
That's better. Because then it's only 90 kids, but they're still gonna bring 90 more to that population.
Last year, they didn't take hardly any
They
out of
closed out of boundary?
boundary
Yeah.
because with the combination of East and Harris joining, they had enough kids to fill the program
So there is
internally.
precedence too, then back to the Middle Canyon, to closing boundaries to out of boundary, sorry,
We
DLI to
can
out of boundary
limit the
parents.
number of out-of-boundary kids that we accept to programs. In Grantsville, they take about 10 a year and fill it within Grantsville. The problem is Spanish is our most popular program.
And it's the program that the state tells us is the most difficult to get teachers, just because of saturation throughout
How many
Utah
there are.
and Wasatch Front. So that there's not heavy teacher availability now in those programs because there's so many of them.
Julia, Karen, do you have more comment?
I would like to ask if Copper Canyon can support 6 years of DLI.
Yeah.
Not without moving some students.
In
But
a
if
couple
we
years.
move those students from Copper Canyon back to Rose Springs and they're starting DLI, we're gonna keep running into the same unless we take everybody who's not a DLI, no matter where they live, and divide them out around the DLIs, you know what I'm saying?
Well, and that's, when we looked at that, we knew that that new charter school would be pulling from Rose Springs, Stansbury Park, Old Mill area. So we knew that would kind of reduce those.
We do have Rose Springs enroll, kind of low also, because I was going to ask about
Rose
that.
Springs is pretty low.
Pretty low, and I have some questions also about Spring Street, Christopher Street, that if we were to not move them, it would make Rose Springs even lower, right?
If you didn't move them to Rose Springs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's, I think,
Like
yeah,
in the
with Stansbury
upper
Park,
300s.
yeah.
Really?
No, 400.
400.
Yeah, because then
Because
you,
it's at 526 in,
Yeah, but
Most of
all the
the-
models we showed, they were like low 4s,
It
and then if you don't
depends
move
on
those streets,
which
it's gonna go
one
down below.
you're looking at.
right, but now
yes.
but see, I'm hearing,
Thing.
this is what I'm hearing though, and thank you for bringing that up, Marisa, because it kind of for me goes back to that whole thing of, do we wait for the dust to settle? Because, we're saying we're going to move. I mean, and I was on the committee, so I've heard it, but then you just really start thinking and getting, appreciate input and other things. So, but I'm hearing, well, then we'll move. We move. The question of, can we sustain the program at Copper? Because we can't move I don't want to move the program, but we can't
but
keep
if we
moving
move
the.
it,
You got. It is that precedence. Like, we don't want to send that message that we're. I agree with the parents. Like, it has to be. It is a priority, and we made it a priority to bring it to our district, so it needs to remain a priority. So it has to be sustainable. But when I hear you say, well, let's move East Erda to Rose Springs, which would give them some numbers. But now we're also talking about, in a few years, there's a chance, the Middle Erda people were either going to keep you at Overlake, or we might move you to Rose Springs. They were both they were fairly comfortable with, from what I understand, with either of those options. That's why really moving them to Copper Canyon wouldn't have solved any overcrowding wouldn't have solved any problem at Middle Canyon. But at least, but I don't want to move them, if we move them now or keep them, I think this consensus of the committee was, why move them right now if we don't have to? Because we are probably going to have to move them in a few years, likely to Rose Springs. But now I'm hearing.
What I'm simply suggesting is, Carol, as much as I wish that personally, I can't predict the future, and I'm not even going to try. What I can tell you is, today, this is where we're at. In a few years, the reality is we're going to have to do this again. And whether it's 2 or 3 years, we're going to have to do boundaries again for elementary schools. But I think it was Kathy that said, why build a school if we're not going to put students in? At some point, we're going to have to move some students around. And
Julia.
Well, so at some point, are we going to get to where, seriously, we're moving students around the DLI to keep that intact, build a culture, and have it at a school?
I think the problem is that, none of us were on the board, and we're not going to throw it, but clearly one of the issues is the fact that Middle Canyon and Copper Canyon are so close to each other that their boundaries just encircle each other.
We can't change that.
Yeah, we
so
can't change
let's
that.
not
We can't move the school. So it is what it is. But go ahead, Julia. I'm sorry.
I think I know the answer to that, Julia. And thinking out loud, I think I would suggest, and this is work meeting, this isn't policy, this is my thought, but I think that we need to do a better job of regulating, not we, sorry, not you personally either, a group as a whole. We collectively, need to do a better job at modulating the DLI out of physical boundary students. And that might be the solution. Does that make sense?
If that's what we need to do in a policy, but I mean, at some point, we've got to figure out how we're going to sustain, because we're asking them to provide transportation to say they're going to be in that program for 6 years. We need to be somewhat consistent on our end.
And I think the challenge is if you keep letting whatever the popular languages are, and heaven knows what they'll be, it's clearly Spanish, but over time. But at some point, closing those programs to out-of-boundary students is the gatekeeper to those schools becoming overrun or getting too large. And I think it was Principal Marble that commented that he was trying to go for 2/3.
Yes, he's not
And
planning
you
on
did that
taking half.
Jazz, no, you didn't, because you're not up there anymore.
And his numbers
But
are
over at Sterling,
showing that.
we did that this year by saying, okay, sorry, there's 60 kids going to the program, but 10 are coming from outside the physical boundaries. And we, again, the we collective.
Spanish is the only one that we have allowed that many in each time because of the numbers of people that want that program.
But if we're really trying to keep the schools to
Then
a
we-
neighborhood school and not moving people out around
Then
that,
we can
the way you
limit
do it
to
is you just
about
say,
10, 15, whatever
and some years
works.
it might be 5.
And it says that when we do it, it's on space availability.
But what we haven't been doing is honoring those, if you will, the boundary students.
What
But
if you,
I think we have up to this point. Is that what you're saying? Because that's who's applied. You've basically just taken who's applied up to this point.
Or have we denied some boundary students? Like,
Usually it's worked out well that between 30 and 40 every year have come from Middle Canyon, and then the rest have come from out of boundaries. So we try really hard to fill it first within the school.
if you left the dual language if we analyzed, at middle, and you started another dual language program, you'd have to, address the issues of sustainability, but same language, Spanish, if the state would, and you put that at Copper, would you draw from Stansbury and Old Mill and Rose Springs into Copper, and would that help sustain that, and you run 2 dual language programs? Was that looked at?
Is it sustainable?
Yeah,
I looked
it
at
seems to be the only program that has a waiting list. The
Yeah.
other languages, there's a little bit of room, but
I worry this year specifically, and I sent the numbers. We had low kindergarten numbers last year,
District-wide.
district-wide. And so I was a little worried about being able to fill all of our programs this year. And right now we're sitting at just really close to 50% full. So we have a lot of slots still open for our languages at this point.
popularity, I mean, it may not even fill the seats currently.
The Spanish will be full, but the other programs are still low at this point in time.
Okay, so that brings me, excuse me, and I'm sorry to dominate, but could you address, because we heard a lot also that night, one of the solutions was just, move the Russian DLI to Copper. That will give them seats. And I'll be honest, I was more like, well, yeah, why not? Program hasn't started. yeah, it would be hard, but a lot, easier to rip that Band-Aid off than, So I asked you about that and others about that. Well, why not move the DLI program? But I think you had some really good response to that as far as drawing people from that neighborhood. So could you maybe address that so that there's a better understanding as why that's not so easy?
Russian is going to be a brand new program in the state. There's no others, so it's not gained popularity. The parents in Overlake have requested a language for several years. So to fill a language that's brand new, that nobody's heard about, we're going to have to put it in a spot where parents want a language and they don't really mind whatever language it is. I worry about filling Russian at Copper Canyon.
Being they're willing to go to the school if it's in their neighborhood, no different probably than some in Middle Canyon are willing to go to that school because it's in their, or to that program because it's in their neighborhood, but they wouldn't necessarily maybe not drive to the program if it were at another school.
No.
Is that your sense?
It is. And
Okay.
and our middle IRTA parents, they've been very good about, we don't care if we go to Overlake, we don't care if we go to Rose Springs. They
Just
both
leave
have
us.
DLI. Leave us together and we'll go.
How many slots have you filled in Russian?
19.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
there's 60.
One other
20, actually.
observation that I'd like to make to the
20
board
now?
again, and I'm just gonna 2 years ago, or when we decided to move Benson Grist Mill area, we all know we got beat up from that, and those parents were really upset. They didn't, we made the committee had made the recommendation, and the board ultimately decided we needed to alleviate some growth at Rose Springs and Stansbury, not knowing that we would be successfully passing a bond and be able to build Old Mill as fast as we did. So that came with a lot of resistance, and Linda Clegg, to her credit, welcomed those parents with open arms. She went around bringing cookies, as we all know, and we heard the story.
She had cookies at the school.
Oh, okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Linda
Linda is
Linda,
such
I
an
guess my
ethical
point
person. She
being is
wants
that
it
she-
specific.
She called Joanne and I out on that particular comment.
Okay. She had, that was hard. It's hard as a new principal to have to bring in parents kicking and screaming and making, we're not going to support your school. We're not going to come and volunteer. And, to her credit, she has done that, and it's been successful. My kids went to Copper Canyon, so I love Copper Canyon. Some of my kids went to Middle Canyon, so of course I'm torn here. But my point being is that I guess I worry too, and I've had this conversation with many of you, and it's not poor Linda, because Linda's going to do her job, and she's going to, do it great, because she's a great administrator, no different than Jerry. They work well together. They really look at each other as sister schools because they're so close to each other. But I worry a little bit that I hope we're not setting Linda up for failure with asking her to now, bring in, if the decision is made to move the DLI program. And I know there's a woulda, shoulda, couldas, but it worries me for her. And, I guess as I've thought about it, and maybe that's where my plug is to wait for a year and see where the dust settles, is we have other elementaries. Yes, Copper Canyon's numbers would be low. And I don't like that any more than anybody else because it affects her programs and it affects her teachers.
I'm a member of
It affects what she gets in trust lands money. There are a lot of things that go into that.
And Rose Springs.
Right,
Could be
that's
in the
right.
same boat.
But
It will be in the same boat.
but
It's not just one.
But Shands will be in the same boat. We're keeping him low, particularly because we know growth is coming in that area. So that was the idea, the boundary committee suggestion. And as we looked at, we don't want to overfill a school, and we know we've got growth. I don't know that the growth is super strong around Copper as much as would help fill it, but it wouldn't be the first time that we have elementary schools with some low numbers. So even though it's not ideal, be okay and see again where things shake out. Maybe there'll be people that leave Middle Canyon because they see how low numbers are at Copper Canyon and they'll want to go there. How about
That's
some
a
cookies?
possibility.
Bring them cookies.
That's a possibility that they'll jump and it's like, I'm going over
So,
there.
It is. Do you guys have,
Okay, I'm done.
yeah, you're quiet down here. Do you have questions, more comments? I can see Scott has a list, so
I'm still,
pondering.
yeah, I mean,
An observation is, Carol, you said wait a year. If the same argument could have been made when we moved those Copper Canyon students,
Right.
I'm sorry, when we moved the
Gristmill.
grist mill to Copper. Well, we don't know the bond's going to pass, and we don't know we're going to. So maybe we should just wait and see. I'm just very concerned that the reality is we're going to be in this exact same room in March of 2018 having the same conversation, and at some point having some closure and that angst. I think a common theme that I saw through emails. Heavens, we got enough emails this weekend. Was my students worried, my students crying, all that angst, and if anything, we're perpetuating that unknown for those students and closing the door to that. At least this is what we're doing, knowing full well and being totally transparent. The boundaries will be a discussion again in 2 or 3 years, but we're able to put that to bed, and we're not having the same exact conversation, and we're dragging that out for a lot of those students for the next 12 months. There is something to be said for that, and it may not be the perfect solution, whatever we come up with, but I think kicking the can down the road just makes me really nervous. And I still haven't heard a proposal that allows us to kick the can down the road, short of pulling students, the behavioral classroom out of middle, or bringing a portable in. I mean, there's not a lot of choices that I've heard that allows us just to buy another year.
Portable.
I do
Portable.
totally understand what you're saying, Scott, and I appreciate that. But I also, the argument could be made of if they're on notice now, like, we're going to give you a year, and we'll see where the chips fall.
Well, I
And
don't care if you do it. And a year from now, there'll be just as many people want to go the other way or this way. We'll be just having the same discussion over and over. We just have to make a decision, because no matter whether we make it now, a year, 5 years from now, somebody's going to be unhappy. So we have to try to figure out what's the very best for the most of the kids and do it. That's my vote.
Only we're not voting.
it's the very best for most of the kids right now, Kathy.
Yeah.
What do you think?
What do you
what's
think-
best for the
Okay,
kids?
so what is the very
What is
best
the
for the
very
kids right
best
now?
in
What
this
is
situation?
what
What
are
is
you
your-
It's
thinking?
me. I've been praying for a week since the last meeting, and I haven't had any great inspiration yet, but I'm still praying.
Are you expecting a vision?
Yes, I expect a vision to come and everything
Well,
will be
when you see
beautiful.
it, I want to know.
And I guess I would hope that those of you who are here have to know that we're losing sleep over this, people. This is what's keeping us up at night. And we get that. We're not trying to, but we are too. And this is not easy. And, I joke and say, I have the reputation perhaps on the board as being the bleeding heart. Maybe it's true. Scott, go ahead, say it.
You just need a Band-Aid, Carol. Get over it.
Well,
Somebody's going to be unhappy, and that's the end of the day. Kathy's dead right. And so we got to make a decision. And
It's a joke, but sometimes I want to do 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato, 4, and call it good. Because it seems like to me, no matter which way I decide, it's bad for somebody.
Well,
This is
now you
true.
can kind of get an idea. I mean, honestly, when we were trying to find a neighborhood to move, we ran into wall after wall after wall of trying to find a neighborhood to move from that area that would make sense. And that's when the suggestion came up to move the program rather than the neighborhood. So, I mean, it was and is still a viable solution to moving kids.
At some point, I would suggest to you, and I heard it for an hour and a half on Wednesday otherwise, but I just believe with all my heart. The program is built on engaged students marvelous teachers, and administration who's supportive. And at the end of the day, whether that's at Middle Canyon, the only difference, the same students will be there whether they're in the halls of Copper Canyon or in the halls of Middle Canyon. The Spanish teachers, at least for sure, are going to go to Copper, and probably a lot of those English teachers will go with them. But I don't know that. But we'll see what happens there.
Probably not.
But I can tell you that administration would be every bit as engaged, and not a knock on one or the other, but I would suggest that they will both be equally engaged. And the physical halls of a school are not what make a school. And the parental involvement is key, and I know that some parents have said they won't be involved if they move. I think that they probably will because it's their students. And the reason they're involved in their school today is because of their students. They're not there because, Jerry, I'm sorry, but they're not there for you. They're not. They're not there for the walls of Middle Canyon. They're there because their students are there. And if their students are somewhere else, they'll be there supporting their students. And so I guess that's why it seems like that makes sense to me, because that at the end of the day, it is a program that's being driven by the participants. It's not those 4 walls or however many walls are in that school with lots of walls, but that make the program.
I agree with Scott. I feel strongly we should not move neighborhood kids to make room for a program.
One other thing I would say, I've got a lot of emails that said if we went to Copper Canyon with that they wouldn't have a parent-teacher conference, they wouldn't have parents for PTA. They wouldn't have. I worked there for 3 years at Gold Medal, and there was no DLI, and I'll tell you they had a large number of parents for community council for PTA. I don't care what the program is. The parents care about their kids. They're going to be there for parent-teachers, PTA, and for community council, no matter what program you have, because they care about their kids.
Julia? You're starting to say something.
Yeah, I don't know. I get the Middle Canyon part where they've already kind of got that culture going, and there's a lot of students.
They have it.
I mean, I really, that is really hard for me, although if I had to pick, I would want to keep the program together rather than
And split. Yeah, I don't want to split it. I don't go for that at all.
I want to share one last observation.
Can we pause for 1 second before you do that? How much executive do we have, Superintendent?
Madam President, we just have a couple of items under legal and personnel, so
So even if we could do some after if we need to?
Yeah, you could actually go all the way to 7 if you need that time. That's when the regular board meeting starts, and then you can do executive session after. Right now, it's listed at 6 o'clock or 6:30.
Yeah, I just didn't want it to be like an hour and a half worth of
That's
executive
totally
stuff
up to you. If you want to continue this, the next thing you have to shift into is the regular meeting at 7.
Okay.
I was just going to share on a more humorous note that I didn't realize that this was my profession. I made a big note here that a couple of them said we really did a poor job in choosing our profession in the comments, and I just kind of laughed to myself. I didn't even realize this was my profession. It's a part-time gig. I just was kind of one of those humorous comments that somebody made.
Considering the discussion the last 6 months, I think we were
pretty clear on that. But anyway, I just kind of laughed when I heard that comment. Like, okay, they didn't know.
Okay, I'm going to throw out one more.
10 hours doing something else. Right?
Okay,
You asked, well, what, kicking the can down the road. Maybe you're right. Rip the Band-Aid off.
What do we do with Middle Canyon this year?
Okay,
If we
well,
do
and
wait for
that was where I was going to go with that. So this is the hard thing, is we talk about, we hear parents saying, don't move the program, but then they're saying, move the behavior program. So that is kind of a tough thing, because we're saying we're willing to move one program, but we're not willing to move another program. But I totally get, my daughter is a severe special needs teacher, and I get that they are, if we're talking about kids that need stability, those are probably the kids that need it the most. And so I don't want to advocate moving the programs, at least that the behavioral program, but that could be an option this year to give one more year of a classroom, because Jerry said, she doesn't have any classroom space, but that could be one classroom.
So
It-
Carol,
And then move it back the next
and
year?
then move back next year?
No, why
Or
could it,
what?
I mean, well, if we're talking about, could we not leave it at Copper Canyon?
They were getting back one from West.
But she just said, sorry, I'm just being the devil's advocate. We already said that we have
Three at West.
two programs in one elementary school. There was at one point. Didn't you just say that at one point we had?
Grants.
Sorry, I'm not.
Sorry,
I'm just
Joanne.
throwing
Up
it
and
out
down,
there.
Up and down.
I forget the microphone. We have 3 programs right now, 3 classrooms
Okay.
at West Elementary because of the space.
Of the portable city.
Mhm.
But are
Okay.
there any schools that ongoing have 2 classrooms?
Not now. We've made sure that there's one.
So
Because of the IEP situation.
And I'll tell you what, I'll give Principal Poole a thumbs up. He has really done a fabulous job with taking. No, we've made sure and fix that.
So Carol, your proposal is to kick the can down the road. Your proposal is to move the behavioral classroom for a year or 2, a year it sounds like, to Copper and then move them back
Or possibly permanently if it
permanently.
stays.
But then give middle a pass and everybody else gets one.
That's
long
not what
term,
I'm
that's-
saying.
Well,
I mean,
where's their other program going to come from?
where is Middle Canyon's other program going to come from? You mean classroom space? or-
No, if you move them out now, the special needs, the behavioral classroom out this year, and every school has one.
I know. It's,
So what program are they going to get and when are they going to get it?
it's my understanding that Willow doesn't have a program.
No, they're full. They've got portables.
She's talking about a high needs.
A high needs program.
They don't right
A
now.
unit.
They have the all-day kindergarten.
Which is a program.
We've, I try and spread them out. But it's not IEPs.
Just throwing it out
Yeah.
there. We keep talking about, and again, Middle and
It's tough to-
Copper are a mile away from each other.
Well, I think,
But it's
not-
tough to bus kids from Tooele to Willow for those kind of programs. We try to keep it in the same.
so they're at GES, which has
Yeah.
more
Okay, but
space.
so I can see that, but but it's a mile away.
So what's your proposal, Carol?
To
I-
move the BEC to Copper.
I think, Jerry, do you still have a room that your literacy aid is using? Not a classroom anymore? I thought we moved that last year. So, and we have done that before. We've moved like literacy areas to other spots and not use classrooms when it's full. But remember, when you're asking to fill up a school, it's computer time, PE time, libraries, recess,
Lunches.
lunchrooms, bathrooms. That's the part that
Right.
you have to realize what you're asking.
Other comments? Does everybody have their questions answered enough for now that we can go into executive? Or
I
do
do
you
have
wanna
one
keep going?
last. Can we just talk about Stansberry for a moment?
Yeah, I have questions about Stansbury too.
I totally shifting gears, and I realize that some of these, what we just talked about, could impact some of the other outcomes of Stansberry. But I just need some clarification. This is probably a better forum than to. It's still a public forum, but just kind of in a work meeting setting. Stansberry is about as clear as mud.
I don't think you can make a wrong decision with Stansberry Park.
So-
Just
Not what
because,
that's not what the people who live there say.
I know, but because the only areas that are being moved are buses, and all of those parents, we will have room in every single school for anybody that wants to apply for open enrollment.
So that makes more sense to leave that and let the dust settle on what happens with the charter, and then move some of those later, if that, I mean,
You're gonna
you're
have to
saying you
make it.
could leave them at, they're currently at Stansbury?
Who's that?
Stansbury.
I'm sorry.
You're
talking
you're
about
going
The
to
ones that Marisa brought up.
Right.
The
Spring Street?
Spring Street.
I can't
and-
remember the three,
Right.
the names, but I remember Spring
Right.
Street.
And that's because it
I
ran
wasn't
into
sure
the open field, so when our committee member who lives in that area said, instead of just having these two little streets
Yeah.
by themselves, they should be included with this group because they're the last streets in that area and they're building.
Well, and when, and from a busing standpoint, when they connected, Delgado with Schooner, and there's not, did you used to just go down Delgado and then try to do a turnaround? Now you're saying you're gonna go through either way, but you're not gonna have to try to turn around because you don't have a dead-end street, right?
That's correct. We could go either way now through Delgado
To go to either school.
to either school.
Right. So,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying,
We-
but you'll just have to route either that way, or this to Old Mill, or this way to.
Correct. Right now, by going down Delgado, it's going to pick up. We have students on Delgado walking all the way down to the turnaround, so they're walking a little over a half a mile to get to the bus, and we try to make 3/10 of a mile the walking distance, and still be in state guidelines.
The board, I mean, kind of in the work meetings format, help me understand where your heads are. I mean, what's the Stansbury, those.
Let the
sort of
dust
like what
settle.
Joe- Well, yeah, no, but we can't let the dust settle. That means what? You're not gonna do anything? I mean, we gotta put some
We have
students
to
in.
put
No, no,
kids in
no,
Old Mill,
of course, Old Mill, but that particular area, those three streets, they're already at Stansbury.
And what does that do to numbers?
That's what I was trying to look at, because
By leaving.
Sorry, Joanne.
you did,
Okay. I forget that I gotta have the microphone. We didn't look at putting those streets.
Rough number. I gotta.
I
know
mean,
something. You
because
want me to
we
vote tonight?
took that whole lower Delgado section and put them together and added Spring Street to it. Originally, the very first plan had that whole corner with Delgado going to Old Mill. But then the numbers were low at Rose Springs and
But we
So-
also know
right now they go to
Stansbury.
Stansbury, right?
Yes.
some of them. There's that section that hooks onto Delgado that has some Stansbury Park students and some Rose Springs students.
Can you point to that section on my map here? Because I look at
Wynn
this
would
map
have
and
to
it
show
looks
you
like it's
exactly.
chopped to.
Marisa has a map for you.
Can you bring up that, Jim, can you bring up the map?
On Delgado, there's about 25 to 28 students that are going to Copper Canyon. Just
That's
not-
Delgado proper.
Just Delgado alone is about
To Copper Canyon.
to Copper Canyon.
And it's our understanding they want to go to Old Mill. 'cause
Correct.
They're with their, that's right.
Correct.
So let,
Is they're with their Copper
so
Canyon
let's let
people.
them do that.
Like, yeah.
And
Correct.
What's the boundary proposal is, you've heard me all say this before, boundaries
Or
really
busing.
are really bus routes, because we have open enrollment and they can go whatever direction they want. What we're really talking about, and I think it's particularly in Stansbury, where there's enough headroom in every one of those schools, anybody can go to any school they want.
Yeah.
It's just, where are we taking the bus? And from a busing perspective, that Delgado Street would only have about 25 students on the bus. And my recollection from the boundary was, what we did is that bus naturally comes around that street, and we've simply said, let's fill the bus and take all of those students in that area to the same direction. Is that?
Correct. I do have two buses in that area right now. One that does go to Rose Springs, and one goes to Copper Canyon.
And we could continue that,
Correct.
but does that really make sense? And financially and prudently as a board, does that really make sense? And that,
Well, it wouldn't make sense to put a third route in there and bus to all three schools from down that same road. That,
No,
that,
no.
no, I'm saying
Right.
go to
Oh,
one.
that wouldn't,
Right.
that wouldn't.
But
Right now, I am getting full funding on both those routes as far as,
Yep.
as what the state guidelines are. I have to have at least over 10 students in a bus. And we do that with the Delgado being about between 25 and 28 students right now.
I need somebody to just point to it on a map, though, because I have had this conversation on the phone with Joanne, and I have driven out there myself, and I just need somebody to touch the map and
Lost out there.
it doesn't work for me. I don't. I have a map, but I don't know if you want to pull one up. It was. Yeah, it was in last packet. We had the maps.
I'll let Wynn look at your map and maybe he can tell you where you are.
Yeah, do you want to?
When we're looking at letting the dust settle, this is another one that again, I was on the boundary committee and it made sense at the time. But it is another one of those situations where once you
My fingers are always too cold.
hear some more and get some feedback,
Yeah.
yeah, there's
Doesn't work
room,
for
but
me.
are we unnecessarily moving those people that want to go to Stansbury anyway and let the dust settle? And when we talk about needing the numbers at Rose Springs, I think we've all heard quite a bit of interest from the Perry Homes development that already planned to go to Rose Springs, so can't count on those numbers, but I think it's pretty clear that that group of neighbors plans to attend Rose Springs. They're right across the street. All I'm saying is we should.
Carol, might I suggest, and I appreciate you're having second thoughts since the boundary committee, but
There's a
remember.
boundary up right there.
There it is.
Oh, you got it. Maybe show everybody. Yeah.
Okay.
So which one is this?
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Scott.
No, I'll finish. I thought in a second.
So this is where they all will go.
So this area right here, this is Delgado, this is where the bus currently comes in, turns around right here. We haven't been able to come down this street because of the construction, garbage cans and things, it's too restricted for the bus to come down. But those houses, they're only working on the last few houses here. So the students are currently walking up to this point here, but this whole section right here is a section that's carrying about 25 to 28 students to Copper Canyon.
Where are the Spring Streets that we're talking about?
That right here, this
They're
street
right on
coming in
the
here
edge.
and in here. And there are a lot of homes going in this area. Last week we had a situation over here with a cement truck blocking the road. I went down to talk to the contractor there. And at that time he said as soon as he finishes the 3 homes there that there's 40 lots back here that are already sold. So I don't know exactly. Right now these are the streets that they're talking about right here.
And point out where the charter school's going.
Right here.
Okay. Their argument is, and I'm not, they want to stay at Stansbury, and that's part of their.
These are the ones I'm busing to Stansbury in this section.
Where are those Spring Streets going now?
Rose Springs.
Sections are going to Rose Springs.
And we're not sending 3 buses.
Well, Spring Street right now is going to Stansbury, right?
Right. They want to stay at Stansbury.
Yeah, we took, because now in that blue section, there's like 76 kids there and 76 kids in the other part, so that we could kind of figure out how many kids would be bused. So we did combine part of Stansbury with the kids that are currently going to Rose Springs.
When you say the other part, you mean the island part, or
Island.
I know, I lived there, and you could have driven that so many times. So right now, my understanding is these kids are currently going.
Stansbury?
Just Stansbury.
But when the person who lives here was on the boundary committee, she said there's no houses here right now, so it made more sense to draw the boundaries right there behind it and connect it with this section.
She was pretty adamant about not moving, so I'm kind of.
But she lives here.
Over there.
She lives lower, sorry.
Oh.
Yeah.
She's in the green.
Okay.
She's a very far
She lives right
left
in this
green.
area.
I mean, not that the committee members
That
making the
doesn't-
decision. I want to make that clear. But
But that part up there has been going to Copper Canyon. So in this map, it doesn't have them going to Old Mill,
just
Just Delgado.
just Delgado.
the highway.
But if the overpass or underpass or whatever they're working on goes through,
And
those kids are fairly close to
Could walk.
walking to either Bonneville or Old Mill, because right now, I mean, we don't want them crossing the highway, but they have they're bus students anyway, because it's not safe really to walk. It's too long to walk to Stansbury, and you've got the whole lake. You've got the attractive nuisance and the hazard there at the lake. So that's the dilemma, right?
The walking boundary is right along this road here to Stansbury.
mean, those three streets just wanted to stay at Stansbury.
Well, I have Spring Street, Christopher Street, and Bay Shore.
So show us those
So
streets.
Spring Street is the one that you showed us.
Spring Street,
Christopher Street.
Christopher, and this is Bay Shore, and this is Schooner coming around Hill Peninsula.
Oh.
But they're at Stansbury now. They're not part of the Copper Canyon mix.
But
Up.
understand the reason they were moved, and this is the comment I was starting to make. Carol, remember, and I appreciate the second thoughts that you're having, but for how many meetings? 6 meetings, 5 meetings, lots of meetings, for 2 and 3 hours with a room full of people, talked through this. And really, truly, the committee felt like that was the right decision. And second thoughts and concerns aside, the reality is that group felt like we need to get enough students at Old Mill. And so to simply say, well, we had 2 parents or 3 parents there were 3 parents who stood up in a public meeting and said, gee, I'd like to stay here. That's back to making hard decisions sometimes that we have to do, even if they're not popular. The committee really felt like we needed to get those students and get Old Mill the population. And it was a bus route conversation, but it was a population conversation too. And so I am confident that most students don't want to move. Most parents don't want to move. They want to stay. But at some point, we have to balance some of those schools, at least take our very best shot. And that's what that committee did, and we were charged with, and we spent a lot of nights here having that conversation, and to come back now and say, well, I had 2 or 3 parents say otherwise.
Scott, that's not fair, honestly, to say, but it's not just 2 or 3 parents. And I guess the only thing that we're hearing, though, is it going to, not that we don't want this charter school to be successful, but if push comes to shove and they say, well, and that they may very well say that, we're just going to go to the charter school, or we'll out of boundary to Stansbury Park. So are we really going to get numbers at Old Mill? Because they're going to say, well, I don't want to go to Old Mill, so I'll either out of boundary anyway to Stansbury, and the bus is already going to be close, or we'll take our kids to the charter school. I don't know. Again, it's an unknown. It's an unknown. I get it. That's all I'm saying with that neighborhood. Maybe it's worth it to let it.
Do you guys have comments down there?
Okay, I'm done.
Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you.
Ellen didn't get the memo about 5 o'clock.
Bring us home, Alan.
Okay, yeah. What's your thoughts? I'm going to hear from you, Mr. Attorney.
There's that circle of red. I haven't heard anything that we've talked about, obviously. So,
Thanks.
was there discussion about the DLI, I'm assuming?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Should we reopen that? No?
Just a little bit.
I'll catch up after the meeting, but
So, if we leave Stansbury, those 3 streets going to Stansbury,
And then you just put Delgado and Schooner?
explain, reconfigure me to how that works.
What I think I heard was, currently, down in that area, we effectively have 3 schools going in that area.
Right.
We have 3 different school
schools
boundaries.
3 different
Best.
neighborhoods.
And
three
what we're
different
trying to
school
do is
boundaries.
consolidate to
2.
2, as shown by, well, it's not blue and green, but
So,
It is blue and green.
yeah.
Well, this is the one option that leaves.
And the blue is
Old Mill
Stansbury.
At about 50%, well, a little less than 50%.
Less than 50%.
There are a couple of other options where the lines are drawn in different places on this area, right?
Yes. So one of the others.
Is this option which?
This is A.
Okay. A.
Can we see?
Can we
Yeah.
see a B or a C?
now let's look at just a wide view of all of them one more time. I'm getting totally.
That's the one that moves all 3 of those and Delgado to Old Mill.
Delgado, and then all of the streets
option?
B.
And why are those schools that are right around the lake right there, their area is kind of cut off stranded, but it's a Rose Springs area?
Lake. And all of those
Are they
areas-
not within walking distance of Stansbury Park?
No, because it's Lily.
There's the lake.
And all of
Oh.
Rose Springs,
Blue is water.
all of those other areas up there behind Solberg's, Mill Pond, Reflections, those used to be Rose Springs too. But they will all be going to Old Mill.
That little triangle part.
Yes. And the reason, if you look at that, it's kind of a natural boundary because it follows the lake.
I know this isn't
There's another one still too.
oh. public input, but Melinda Birch is here and she was on the committee. And I think that she might have a better way to point out to us what streets we're talking about. I think there might be some confusion. Is that, can you-
I don't think
Okay.
that's fair, just because it's not a public hearing and we haven't allowed other people to
Okay.
talk, so.
good point, thank you.
Yeah, she's very, or the. I don't have a stake, it's just, I think there's two confusing things.
Is there a C?
Yes. I thought there were 3.
I thought there was
There
two.
is.
Since we're only mostly confused, you can totally confuse us now.
I don't see it on there. Yeah, it
That's an
was, because I have them
important
pulled up right here.
It's right here.
There's a
That's the
B2.
north C.
There was an
We want the
A
south,
and a
or
B
we
and
want
a
the north C,
B2.
not the
North
south C.
Sea, yeah.
Yeah.
It's right here.
What's the difference?
Do you want me to pass this around?
Or just tell us the difference.
Those 3 streets
Those-
go to Old Mill.
Those
Those
3
three
streets
streets
go
are
to
still
Old
in
Mill, and then the other part goes
Parkview Park goes to Rose Springs.
Rose Springs. So if you go back to another, I can show you. Do you want to open that one of those other maps again, and I'll just show you what?
Sure.
Okay, that's the map she has up. That's it.
The bus route, it follows the bus route.
So that's the difference. It's just that little tail end of the green goes to the blue.
Well, it's kind of more than a tail end, because
It's 76 kids, yeah. And that's because, Erda would stay at Overlake.
Because if we don't do that, Old Mill's gonna be pretty short of people. Or Rose Springs is gonna be short on people.
That's an unknown. A big unknown, actually, because charter's right there.
I think when we talk about this in regular board meeting, we need to have these maps up and available so that we can show them.
My
I would say-
suggestion would be to not confuse it by, I mean, we should have probably, on our, had a A, a B, a C, a D, a E, a F,
Yeah,
a
they're
G,
not,
as opposed to, is that hybrid
one or the
C
other.
or,
Exactly,
or
that is.
Yeah.
first hybrid C, or is that the third hybrid B kind of,
We had numbers, and then somebody said, did that mean your first choice? And it
yeah,
was,
numbers look like,
"Oh,
hey, that's our
we're
first
not
choice,
doing
so.
that. We went with ABC.
Right,
But
there
if
has
we
been,
if we could just keep track of,
Jimmy has the.
yeah, and know that when we vote, just if we vote for option B right here, it's not option B and the other one automatically. They're separate.
The old,
Do we have a map of hybrid B?
For which, for which?
Hybrid
boundary?
beach.
That
Moving
one actually
east-
crosses both.
Moving East Erda.
And I think that's the
Oh,
one.
yeah, that would be the one exception.
That's the one
kind of.
exception, because what it does is it takes, it's really B that we just looked at in Stansbury. And
And draws in.
and then it brings
Draws
in
in
the
East Erda.
East Erda kids to Rose Springs.
And leaves those 3 streets,
And leaves those 3 streets going to
Stansbury.
no,
No.
those 3 streets go to Old Mill.
They don't go to Stansbury in any
Or
of them.
Old Mill.
Yeah, they don't go in Stansbury in any of them.
Those 3 don't.
Those
Oh,
3
those
don't.
3 don't, but
Right.
the
That
lower
other- yeah.
section, but
Okay.
the lower section does. The ones that are currently at Stansbury that want to stay at Stansbury.
No, there is not an option for them to stay unless we create one.
Right.
The hybrid did.
No.
No, there's no hybrid.
I don't.
Christopher Spring, they always, I think they go to.
Because there's only 2 buses, it either has to go Stansbury or Rose Springs, because one is obviously gonna go to Old Mill. So there isn't an option unless you take everybody.
And send 3 buses down there.
That's right. If the goal is, not run 3 routes, run 2, you've got to decide in that area whether they go to Rose Springs or Old Mill, because Old Mill's got to be one because of Delgado.
Mm-hmm. And so the advantage to that hybrid that had been proposed with the East Erda involved was that that gets you the students you need at Rose Springs and allows you to leave those students at Stansbury, that are at Stansbury, at Stansbury.
And leaves the middle Erda
At
At Overlake.
instead of taking them to Rose Springs.
That was the advantage, if you will, and
Which is different from B.
right. That's
Right.
That's
Yeah,
right.
the difference.
That's right.
That's the difference.
The overlay.
I hope I can keep it straight.
Circulated,
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
published, made available on the website.
Yes, it was.
Don't mean anybody understood it.
I did when I wrote it.
Can't worry about understanding.
Well, look at the problems we're having. What do you think the general public had?
We looked at it and studied it.
I know. I'm sure the people who live in the neighborhoods.
They studied it.
That's my problem, I don't live out there, and so it's.
Well, I drove by it. I drove around there a million times and still was confused. Okay. Any other questions? Comments?
I was going to give you a motion to go to executive session.
Okay.
I motion we go to executive session to discuss legal, right,
And personnel.
and personnel.
I'll second it.
It's been moved by Scott, seconded by Kathy to go adjourn to executive session to discuss legal and personnel in the conference room. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
I can leave these, I can leave these here.
We got 20 minutes because we got to be back in here at 5:02. Can I leave this here?
Welcome to the meeting, Ellen.